Guys, welcome to the Vlad Catcher Show, the #1 show for founders, execs, and entrepreneurs who are scaling their businesses. This video is presented by Thread AI, and we have an amazing interview for you today with its founder and CEO, Angela McNeal, about how she created and scaled the business. Angela, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Vlad. Happy to be here.
Well, tell us, Angela, what's the origin story? How did Thread AI come about?
Well, so at Thread, we're building an AI orchestration platform. So the goal is to make it very easy for enterprises to build their AI-powered workflows and agents for their mission-critical applications. My co-founder, Maya, and I met, built, led teams together at Palantir, and we spent years building products that focused primarily on the life cycle of a model. So from training to evaluation to monitoring to management to deployment, so the whole end-to-end ecosystem. And after we left, we realized that the brains, the models, were rapidly improving at an exponential pace, and not just language models. But the infrastructure to meaningfully embed them into your systems, the body was missing. There was a layer that was needed to embed models deeply into workflows and action on them. So the layer where it matters the most. So Maya and I were pretty inspired by that Toolformer paper that came out in early 2023. It was like pre-MCP. It was about how you can train the last layers of your model to speak API or something. And we were like, okay, well, that's not how software works. And I think one of the examples, one of the game was like a calculator or something. But the idea that reasoning capabilities were increasing was very compelling. And it was exciting to think about a world where an AI system could move into more of an autonomous sort of decision-making capability. And we were like, okay, well, there's going to be infrastructure needed to unlock that future of controlled autonomy. So we set out to build just that.
And can you tell us more about how the product works and some specific use cases for businesses?
To make agents run at scale and with enterprise guarantees of reliability, there are a lot of infrastructure components that are needed. You need models, but you don't want to be dependent on specific ones. You need secure connections to data to be able to access different sources of information from your CRMs to your databases to your spreadsheets, whatever they are. You need a way to make sure that your agents can only access pieces of information that they should and not information that they shouldn't. You need the glue, the engine to hold all the pieces together and to connect everything to make sure that if there are failures, well, there can't be actually any failures, right? And most importantly, you need that human in the loop step, so you can inject a critical subject matter expertise at any part of the process, whatever that may be. So we built our platform to abstract away all of those different distributed systems components into one place to provide the right building blocks for enterprises, organizations to build and create and manage these AI workflows and agents. So in our view, you can't have reliable, scalable, agentic AI without this intelligent orchestration layer. And we wanted to provide the right tools for the right builders to make sure that agents aren't seen as these magic black boxes, especially in regulated spaces where it really matters to see where each piece of data goes and who performs what action. So our platform is horizontal, and we serve all different kinds of industries. But there are a couple of some of the most common archetypes and patterns are triaging and root cause analysis. So how can an agent take a first pass at like a support ticket or an incoming alert to better accelerate the human who is tasked to solve that problem? Or dynamic reporting, right? A company has information spread across these different systems with these different access patterns and wants a semi-structured way of aggregating and reasoning across all of that information to turn it into some kind of asset, whether it's a brief or a report or a PowerPoint or some kind of config spec. And then that piece of information is written into a system of record. So our goal is to enable builders to solve a wide variety of problems across the org, but then have the guarantees and controls to solve these core critical operations.
So, Angela, can you tell our viewers what problems would they have if they're not using your product? Because I think it's very easy to grasp the value of a solution if you can imagine, right? Here are the problems I would have if I'm not using this solution.
So, yeah, our thesis has always been, right, AI is not a workflow of in and of itself. It's a part of a workflow. And to do it at scale and to embed it properly at a business with all of those, enterprise guarantees, again, you need lots of infra. And we're seeing a lack of, standard reliability guarantees and ways for tools to support these more agentic patterns. Big picture, again, like we said before, you need models, you need access to different kinds of data, you need different ways to connect across different kinds of identity and access. So right now, the way folks are building is stitching together a bunch of different tools and managing all of that distributed that distributed tech themselves, which is a lot of vendor management and quite a cognitive overload. And there are some really important questions around identity and ownership that we as a field also need to answer. Where there aren't great tools, or really any tools that exist out there that we have set out to address and solve ourselves. So one of the biggest challenges around agent authentication and authorization. So how do these agents access information, and what actions are they able to perform? So taking a step back, right? How do you make sure that when, Alice runs an agent and then when Bob runs an agent, the agents adhere to how the business is defined, that, Alice can have access to information and that Bob can have access to information? And what about when there are parts of an agent that have to run as Alice, on behalf of Alice, for Alice? But what if there are parts as well that need to run sort of behind the scenes? So the agents need to do both things, both on behalf of a human and, as a part of a system. And once you have these, domain-specific subject matter expert agents, are they always tied to a human or a system or a combination of both things? Or are they a new, special, sort of separate thing? And when agents make and perform decisions and actions, where does this accountability lie? And we've set out to address a lot of those problems specifically with our infrastructure.
And I saw on your website, you guys do not have pricing, right? And how come? And what's the key to making that work?
Yeah. So we do have standard pricing for our multi-tenant SaaS offering. So our platform that runs in our cloud. But the reality is we support a lot of different kinds of deployments for all different kinds of enterprises, because our goal is to meet enterprises where they're at. So if due to regulations you need to run in a regional cluster where your data can't leave the EU, or you need us to deploy into your VPC, or you need our Helm chart and want to do it yourself, we set out to provide that flexibility, but each option definitely comes with different associated costs. It hasn't been an objection for us so far, but we are going to have probably soon more information about pricing on our website. And the reality is, right, you can't defer too much, because customers talk to each other, and you want them to talk to each other because you want them to refer you to new customers. So you can't have these crazy deltas in how you price. And as an aside, something we've been thinking about, it's interesting to note, is the industry is sort of witnessing how pricing models for AI is constantly changing, and there's this new school of thought popping up about how, should we pay AI agents, human wages versus sort of the more traditional sort of cloud compute sort of usage-based, which is, what we are. But I think the field is still in early days of experimentation on that one.
And from the time that customers get a demo of your product, how much time is it before they start getting value?
So, it depends on the complexity of the workflow. So after this, if you want, you and I could sit down and we could build, something in the platform, and it could be production ready and scalable in a matter of minutes. But is your data nice and ready? Is it behind an API? Do all your systems that you want to connect to have these access points? Are your client credentials up and running? Have you set up your IAM policies? Are your APIs nicely documented? Or is your data like in a CD somewhere and you want to connect, or you want to connect to these different edge devices? The main thing is, how in order is your house? So, in a couple of minutes, right? We built our platform to be self-service. Again, you can get up and running. And the technical bar for builders for us is, do you know what an API is? Or, are you more traditionally like an enterprise, right? Maybe your data needs to be accessed via SFTP. Or in the middle of an AI-powered workflow, your agent needs to access a system or write to a system that, doesn't have any APIs. So, the time to value can be on the order of, minutes to, days to weeks.
And who's the ideal ICP who usually buys Thread AI and pushes it up in the organization?
For us, yeah, our customers are primarily enterprises that need and want sort of complete control of their data and their information, and need extreme transparency and observability due to the nature of their work and their field. So we look for AI and innovation leaders who are struggling with a combination of, they're trying to constrain and hedge against sort of current platform and security risks. Again, manage that vendor sprawl. They want complete governance and observability over each piece and each system that their AI models access or touch. That governance story is really important for them. Maybe they're relying on, developer frameworks that aren't infrastructure ready. They're either too complex, or they're primarily a code-based solution without the corresponding infrastructure. So without the engine and the data connections and the auth and the access infrastructure all bundled together. Or they're using these sort of traditional old school automation tools, and they want to do much more complex things, but those, the old school tools don't really scale well for this sort of new era of innovation that we're in. And many industry leaders that we meet understand that procuring sort of vertical point solutions is it's not scalable. And they're looking for sort of a foundational platform to create these powerful, distributed, sort of cross-cutting, end-to-end processes. And we want to make sure that, that folks who maybe have concerns about how they've historically treated AI initiatives as these sort of one-off pilots or proof of concepts, they realize and they're excited that, again, this is the platform that they need to take that into production and at scale.
Well, Angela, you are probably like an extreme expert on AI-powered workflows as the founder of this company. What do you think businesses misunderstand or potentially get wrong about AI-powered workflows?
So, we've seen, again, this sort of massive excitement by, I think the world around AI and embedding AI into your business and unlocking transformational change with AI. But we've seen the same pattern sort of again and again and again, where folks have built something for, a small team. They've built it, they've tested a pilot, and maybe working great in the pilot, but then all of a sudden when they flip the switch and they try to scale it to another team or more users or more data or slightly different than what the bounds of the pilot, it just fails catastrophically. And the reason we've built what we've built is because we think the majority of reasons for these sort of catastrophic failures is that this infrastructure is missing. So the infrastructure to be able to handle, again, the scale and the reliability and the durability and the different data types and the auth and the access patterns. And so I think that is sort of one of the biggest, sort of most, I think, common misconceptions. And we've, seen it's now so quick and easy to build these kingdom of apps and spawn code, especially with, Cursor and, Claude and all of these, these great sort of code gen tools. But people are forgetting again that like it's that last 10% that's really hard, the like reliability, the durability, all those guarantees. And when you're again in production at an enterprise and potentially in like a sort of a mission critical process, even one failure out of 10,000, 100,000, a million can be, a catastrophic error. And most of these, pilots aren't built for that kind of reliability. So, it's good to also remind teams and organizations that let's not lose sight of what the actual business objective is when building these AI-powered workflows. The business objective of an operations team at powering like a retail manufacturer isn't to build the world's best like AI-powered engine. It's to like build the most accurate pipeline and agent that can process these bill of materials. So how do we make sure that when folks are building these AI workflows, they're focusing on, again, the business outcomes and not worrying about sort of the tech behind the scenes?
And your product just seems like such a clear value add. Like it just seems
Mm,
like a clear value product. What's
mm.
the most common objection that customers, what's the most common objection you hear, and how do you guys overcome that objection?
I mean, I think it's the classic, uh, the software paradigm of build versus buy. Folks, very talented, very technical engineering teams, they often want to build every piece themselves, manage every single piece and every single component. And our general push is like, okay, how about you again build with our platform, that you buy. But the point is that our platform will sort of accelerate that time to value, and again allows you to sort of focus on that business objective and not on the like sort of the deep tech behind the scenes. But I think again it's just the truly the classic engineering paradigm of build versus buy. That hasn't changed, at least in this era of AI.
And which of your thinking or beliefs have changed, right, since you started this journey in building this company?
I mean, like, initially, I'd kind of thought that, startups have no chance against incumbents when it comes to like net new functionality at these enterprises. And, incumbents both in the like the automation space and the like AI infrastructure space. But, I've been very pleasantly surprised. I've been able to claim this space and, sort of keep advancing and sort of keep winning at these enterprises. And so, maybe where some would say like a startup has no place being, but it's a good sort of re-education in like punching above your weight class.
And what's the key to selling to these big enterprises? I think that's
Mm,
like a fascinating thing, right? Because you sell to big companies, you mentioned like around
mm.
1,500 people. What's the key for businesses to sell to these big firms?
Yeah, I think it's trust. I think these enterprises, again, it's they want to know that you understand their considerations, their needs, demands, their risk profiles. So again, if they're excited about innovation and they're looking for sort of creative, exciting new ideas, and they look to startups, they want to make sure that if they put in like a critical process in your infrastructure. And again, if like one out of maybe even in 100 times it fails, a critical process that again it's a non-starter. So how you build that trust, how you listen, how you make sure that you again like understand, you take the time to understand their like needs, their demands, their concerns, the different kinds of risk, whether it's reputational risk versus like legal risk versus like workflow risk, financial risk. I think the key to working with these large companies again is trust and building those relationships.
And how did the name Thread AI come about, Angela? Because it's such an awesome
Yeah.
name. I'm serious. You have one
Yeah.
of those names. I can't actually forget it. It's
Yeah.
like Thread AI. How did the name come about?
Well, we toyed with a lot early on, but again, our big picture uh, thesis is that again, AI is a part of a workflow. It's not a workflow in and of itself, and so we were like, okay, how do we thread AI, weave AI meaningfully into an organization? We played with a lot of permutations of that. We're also, software engineers by trade and training, and so how you and the thread as a separate meaning, but the big picture is how you again incorporate and cohesively connect AI into your organization. And we were like, okay, we're going to thread it in, and that's where the name came.
A lot of folks are going to watch this interview,
Mm.
and to the AI leaders at big companies, what else would you say to them?
Innovation doesn't have to be at the cost of um, again, security and risk. There are ways to innovate. There are ways to move quickly. There are ways to not be left behind. Um, and you don't need to throw out decades worth of best practices and learnings about distributed systems and security just because, there's a GPT-5 or whatever. Those instincts are correct, and you've built institutions that stand. But there's a way to incorporate sort of the best of both worlds. And, we believe we've built the platform to be able to allow you to do that. And I think our customers would agree.
Well, Angela, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Vlad. I appreciate it.